Horror on the Orient Express, Chapter 6, Part 1, Love and Death on a Gondola. The investigators nursed their coffee, their hands trembling with each jolt of the locomotive. The dining carriage was empty, save for one young and plump woman veiled in black. She muttered something in Italian under her breath before breaking into a sob. "Papa, papa," she whispered meekly. Leopold, curious as a cat, craned his neck. The woman was clutching a twin locket containing two pictures, one of an elderly gentleman and the other of a young man with a Mediterranean complexion and an aquiline profile. Yet none of our companions had the will to engage in conversation or console her. Milan still weighed heavily on their hearts and minds. Everyone retreated to their respective berths to catch a bit of reprieve before their arrival in Venice. The pieces of the simulacrum were beginning to take their toll. Claudia found her left arm difficult to move, racked with bouts of acute pain. Meanwhile, Giovanni struggled with throbbing stomach aches, and a cloud seemed to loom ever more densely over his mind. Outside, Veneto's lands and valleys flashed past, replaced gradually by half-frosted waters as the train rolled onto the bridge connecting the mainland to Venice. The Orient Express vanished ominously into a shroud of mist, overtaking the town and the lagoon. As soon as the investigators disembarked at Santa Lucia station, the salted sea air struck their nostrils. The saline breeze made Claudia nauseous. Just a few meters from the group, the woman in black was now yelling, surrounded by blackshirts. She appeared to be trying to defuse a potential brawl between a pudgy black-shirt bureaucrat and a young man with the face of a hawk. Leopold recognized him as the aquiline-featured man from the locket and informed his companions. Father Giovanni translated the exchange. The black shirt, a certain Alberto, was threatening to beat the young man, Giorgio, calling him a communist. The fascist insisted that Maria, the woman in black, come with him so he could escort her home. Gutted by the scene, the priest felt compelled to intervene, promptly joined by Dr. Marsh, who had been moved by the unfolding drama. Giovanni approached with open palms and a soft tone. As soon as the others noticed the priest's presence, they crossed themselves, ashamed of their behavior. Giovanni asked Alberto for directions to the finest church in Venice, a question that cooled the chubby administrator's temper. Scoffing, Alberto replied that the finest church was obviously the Basilica San Marco. Turning around, the priest asked Giorgio if he would mind showing him and Dr. Marsh the way. The young Italian, confused but respectful, accepted. Giovanni offered one last glance to Maria, who mouthed a silent thank you before following Alberto and his goons to a waiting car. Feeling slightly left behind, Claudia, Rose, and Leopold examined a brochure of Venice provided by the Orient Express staff. They decided to go ahead and secure rooms at the Palazzo Gritti. As soon as they rounded a corner near Santa Lucia station, the three companions were greeted by water. A vaporetto was anchored nearby, and they inquired about reaching the palazzo. The captain laughed and bid them to hop on. The palazzo was on his route. They dropped off their luggage quickly at the palace before heading out into the misty city. Claudia was still recovering from the harrowing experience of her shriveled skin. She hoped to find some anti-inflammatory medicine at a pharmacy before focusing on the hunt for the simulacrum. Rose, ever faithful to her mistress, accompanied her, leaving Leopold to begin the investigation alone. The Belgian private eye walked briskly through the soaked and foggy streets of Venice. The city reminded him of Bruges, a place he had visited many times in his youth. Though not Flemish, he couldn't help but feel somewhat at home. The hotel receptionist had given him a promising lead: the Biblioteca Marciana, home to over 500,000 books. Surely he could glean some information about the simulacrum. The library itself was a stunning square building of white marble, adorned with tall arched windows. Leopold stepped inside, impressed by the ornate wooden ceilings and vibrant painted panels. He recalled that their sponsor, Professor Smith, had mentioned that the piece of the simulacrum hidden in Venice had arrived during the Napoleonic Wars, after the French conquest of the region. He began his search among the history books. Hours passed as he turned the yellowed pages of ancient volumes. Eventually, he uncovered references to a mysterious plague that had afflicted Venetians, hundreds reporting intense pain in their left leg. Thinking he was on a promising lead, Leopold pushed further, seizing the diary of a French lieutenant. To his dismay, he spent the next several hours reading salacious accounts of a depraved soldier's escapades in the city of 1,000 courtesans. Rose stepped into the pharmacy with Claudia, asking in rudimentary Italian for as many painkillers as possible. The apothecary returned with 10 boxes of various remedies packed into small metallic tins. The two women left as soon as the pharmacist stopped lecturing them about the dosage instructions for each drug. For a change, Claudia wanted to treat them to a nice restaurant, a reward after the harrowing events of the past few days. They hailed a water taxi and asked where they might find a good establishment. The captain, eager to share his personal favorite, welcomed them aboard. The boat left the Grand Canal for the Giudecca Canal, drifting away from the main network of islands toward more secluded islets. The mist grew thick, so thick that Rose and Claudia could barely see beyond the prow. Suddenly, Rose spotted a silhouette rising from the water. They were heading straight toward it. At the last second, the captain veered hard, dodging what looked like a ghost in the fog. Rose's skin crawled. It was a man, an old man with menacing, piercing eyes. Claudia asked if it could have been the stalker from Paris. Rose nodded silently, her face pale and her eyes hollow with fatigue. They arrived at the restaurant on a small islet off Rio dei Scorzeri. Their navigator dashed away in his boat without so much as a backward glance. As the women stepped onto the pontoon, it vibrated, once, then again. A heavy thud beneath their feet. Something was moving in the water. Alarmed, they hurried to the sidewalk, the brackish sea gently licking the stone. Claudia leaned over the quay to peer into the depths, until Rose pulled her back. How could her mistress forget her own ichthyophobia? Rose took her place and bent slightly over the edge. She saw it. A maw of jagged teeth gaping just beneath the surface, drawing water inward. A webbed hand clung to the moldy wood. Thinking fast, Rose grabbed her purse and began emptying the contents of one of the medical boxes into the water. The maw snapped. The sea frothed and churned. It was gobbling up everything. As Rose narrated the horror to Claudia, the occultist panicked and rushed into the restaurant, purchasing all the grissini from a bewildered waiter. She stormed out, thrust the breadsticks into Rose's arms, who then flung them into the canal. To her dismay, 2 more maws surfaced. That was the end of it. Rose and Claudia began racing around the islet, avoiding the sidewalks as much as possible in search of another water taxi or vaporetto. Fortunately, one stopped as soon as Claudia waved. They would soon be back among the main islands of the city. The occultist and her maid couldn't wait to return to the hotel. Giorgio was a good soul. That much was clear to Elijah and Giovanni. The young man had kindly shown them around Venice, first by vaporetto and then on foot, guiding them from bridge to bridge until they reached the famed Piazza San Marco and its basilica. They stopped at a pastry shop where Giorgio treated them to pasticcini and coffee. He poured his heart out to the two men, jumping erratically from topic to topic. He loved Maria, the woman from the station, and she loved him in return. Sadly, her father, Don Giovanni, a respected theology professor at Ca' Foscari University, had recently passed away. Months ago, when Giorgio had asked for Maria's hand in marriage before she departed for Milan, Don Giovanni had refused. The old man saw him as too hot-headed, too full of revolutionary ideas. It had broken Maria's heart. But there was another suitor, Alberto Rossini, a fascist, a bully. He was well connected and also sought Maria's hand. Fortunately, Don Giovanni despised fascists and had rebuked Alberto even more fiercely than Giorgio. But that wasn't the end of it. While Maria was away visiting her Milanese aunt, Alberto continued to pressure her father. Just a week ago, Don Giovanni was found unconscious in a canal, an accident according to the Blackshirts. They claimed he had slipped. He was taken to the hospital but caught pneumonia in the process and died yesterday. Giorgio's lips quivered as he stared at the basilica. He was convinced the Blackshirts had pushed Maria's father into the Rio, but what could he do? What could anyone do against someone with close ties to the fascist brass? After a moment, Giorgio calmed himself. He looked at the doctor and the priest and asked if they would attend the funeral, scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Both men nodded solemnly. Grateful, Giorgio promised that Maria would send a formal invitation. He then excused himself, apologizing for taking up their time. Before departing, he handed them his address and recommended they stay at the Palazzo Gritti. Once they had finished their coffee, Giovanni and Elijah crossed the wet pavement of the piazza and entered the basilica, hoping to find more information about the Sedefkar simulacrum. A local priest informed them that recent flooding had damaged the church's archives. Only a few manuscripts had been salvaged so far, but the investigators were welcome to inspect them. The water was only knee-deep. He provided them with boots and a lantern, and they descended into the entrails of the church. It was freezing and damp. Research became a toil. As the hours passed, Giovanni's stomach writhed in pain. Elijah held the lamp, helping where he could. Together, they uncovered an old tome, one Giovanni had encountered referenced before in both London and Paris. The Devil's Simular, an illuminated Latin manuscript. Written by an anonymous Cistercian monk around 1260, the text was considered apocryphal, the work of a mad cleric. The name simulare echoed uncomfortably close to simulacrum. Giovanni had feared the trail had gone cold in the archives of Notre Dame, but this old tome claimed the manuscript was housed in the church of Santa Maria Celeste, right here in Venice. Satisfied, the two men emerged from the archives and happened upon Leopold, who was wandering back toward the hotel through the deepening mist. The evening was short-lived for Claudia. After dining with her traveling companions, she retired to her room, frustrated and exhausted. She disliked Venice. Too much water, too many things hiding in the depths. Meanwhile, Elijah went to the bar with Leopold. The doctor bought a round for a few war veterans and staff, hoping to loosen tongues and learn more about Alberto. The man, it turned out, was well known among Venetians. Though officially just a bureaucrat, he was deeply connected to the fascist regime. He was prone to anger and had a reputation for being crude and inappropriate with women. Giovanni sought a quiet place to sketch. He lay down on a couch and began drawing the basilica from memory, but nothing he put on the page pleased him. Rose, needing air, decided to walk Percy. The sound of lapping water echoed gently across the canals, mingling with the muffled hum of Venetian life. Fog clung to the alleys like gauze. She walked for quite some time, crossing bridges and wandering across small islands. Eventually, she noticed the streets were entirely deserted. Percy began to hiss into the mist. Rose adjusted her hair into a bun and picked up her pace, but she kept circling back to the same places, again and again. Then a laugh, a low, menacing chuckle that echoed through the fog. Rose quickened her pace. She called out, threw pebbles at windows. A light flicked on above her. She looked up. A man hung by a loose noose in the upper window, blood trailing down his neck. His eyes were dull at first, then his irises focused and locked onto hers. The light flickered. The body vanished. Rose ran. Her heart thudded in her throat. Somehow, by sheer miracle, she found herself in front of the palazzo again. She barely acknowledged Elijah and Leopold at the bar. She walked past them and up to her room, her heart still pounding. The private eye and the doctor were enjoying themselves well into the dead of night when suddenly a scream pierced the air outside. Morte, morte! The two men, slightly inebriated, stumbled into the street alongside a few curious staffers. More screams followed, then sirens in the distance. Elijah and Leopold followed the noise until they reached a small campo where a crowd had gathered, whispering in hushed tones. A body had been found, impaled. Too drunk to make sense of the situation or find a vantage point, they saw nothing. The police had already begun to shield the scene from view. Elijah, in a moment of poor judgment, attempted to climb onto Leopold's shoulders for a better look, but instead fell straight into a puddle. The crowd burst into laughter. As they picked themselves up, wet and embarrassed, they overheard murmurs that the woman who had screamed had run into a nearby alley. Sharing a look, the two men followed. They found a small group of policemen surrounding a disheveled woman, rocking back and forth, clutching her knees. "I've seen the devil," she muttered. "I've seen the devil." The officers spotted the foreigners and promptly pushed them away, ordering them to return to their hotel. Breakfast at the palazzo was cloaked in silence. No one spoke for a long while. The mood was heavy, as though the night's horrors still clung to their coats. Finally, a butler broke the quiet, delivering a letter from Maria. It was a formal invitation to her father's funeral and a kind request that the investigators visit her at their earliest convenience. This small gesture, an icebreaker, loosened the group. Gradually, they began to share what they had discovered and to plan for the day ahead. Unlike their rushed time in Milan, they now had the luxury of at least a little time. Claudia expressed a desire to find an esoteric shop in hopes of locating something that might tip the scales in their favor. Elijah pointed to the nearby newspaper rack. The front page described the previous night's murder. A man named Mario Rossi had been found impaled, his throat torn open. His wife, Anselma, was now in custody. The doctor explained this to the group and announced that he would head to the police station first. Rose insisted on joining him, still shaken by her encounter with the hanged man. After visiting Anselma, they planned to stop by Maria's home that afternoon. Meanwhile, Giovanni and Leopold would pursue the trail of the Devil's Simular at Santa Maria Celeste. The doctor, the priest, and the private eye would regroup at the Biblioteca Marziana by early evening. It took Claudia quite some time to find an esoteric shop worthy of the name. When she finally arrived at La Strega Scura, her hopes were quickly dashed. Yes, the establishment had the right herbs, tomes, and stones, but nothing of use to a practiced occultist. Disappointed, Claudia instead asked about Alberto. Something flickered in the shopkeeper's eyes. Alberto was well known in certain occult circles around Venice. He often dabbled in seances and ritual work. Intrigued, Claudia requested his address. The shopkeeper handed it over without hesitation. She boarded the next vaporetto and disembarked near his residence, a luxurious pension with its own private pontoon. The area was crawling with blackshirts who patrolled the narrow sidewalks. The water near the building was strangely foul and blackened. A putrid stench hit Claudia's nostrils. She did her best not to retch as she approached the door, guarded by two blackshirts. One of them, who spoke broken English, stared at her with predatory amusement. Claudia asked if she could speak with Alberto. The guard knocked and relayed something through the door. A moment passed before another blackshirt opened it, barring the way. He scrutinized her in a way that made Claudia want to slap the smug look off his face. The three men chuckled under their breath, exchanging obscenities in Italian. Claudia repeated her request, voice cold and firm. "No," said one flatly. But in that moment, through the doorframe, Claudia saw what lay beyond. More fascists and a terrified girl in her early 20s. Her robe was torn, her makeup had run down her cheeks. She struggled to cover herself, something twisted in Claudia's gut. This wasn't over. She turned and left, enduring their whistles and jeers. But she would be back, and she would burn this house to the ground. Claudia needed to escape the water. Venice was suffocating her. The canals rose around her like bloated veins, choked and sluggish. The stench grew worse with every breath, as if the lagoon itself were rotting from within. Just as she thought she could bear no more, the tide shifted. The foulness released into the Adriatic, leaving the air momentarily clearer. She returned to Santa Lucia station for respite and silence. Sitting at a cafe inside the terminal, she ordered a vodka. Neat. Tears welled in her eyes. She had never felt so impotent. A few drops of vodka spilled on the glass tabletop. Slowly, impossibly, the liquid moved, forming a message. "I have killed the king. Wait for me, sister." Oddly, the words brought her comfort. She finished a light meal and, with no real desire but a sense of duty, returned to the streets of Venice and its stench. Elsewhere, Giovanni and Leopold arrived at the Campo of Santa Maria Celeste, only to find that the church was long gone. Its facade had been swallowed by what Giovanni guessed was an expansion of the Venetian Naval Academy. Exasperated, Leopold climbed the steps and flagged down the first cadet he saw. Fortunately, the young man spoke decent English and was well versed in local history. He explained that the church of Santa Maria Celeste had burned down in the 16th century. However, the brave nuns had saved a number of scrolls and tomes. now held in the Biblioteca Marciana under the Maria Celeste collection. Thanking him, the priest and the detective turned and hurried toward the library. Rose and Elijah had a stroke of luck. The officer in charge of the case mistook them for a special medical team, doctor and nurse from Canada, sent to check on Anselma's health. It helped that Anselma spoke English. They were ushered into a damp prison room. The stench of the sea seeped through the ancient stone. Anselma was curled in a corner, rocking gently, muttering. Rose opened her bag and brought out Percy, hoping the cat might coax a response. It worked. The woman looked up, eyes wide with trauma, and began to speak in fragments. A man, no, a beast, had attacked her husband, tried to hang him, tore his throat out, carried the body above the campo. Then, impossibly, the creature had dropped him. Impaled. Anselma wailed. Rose comforted her gently, then picked up Percy and nodded to Elijah. They left, hearts heavy. The maid and the doctor took a vaporetto to Maria's address. They arrived in front of a modest pensione, its walls kissed by the sea. Bice, the housemaid, welcomed them in. Maria greeted them with grace despite her mourning. She spoke of her love for Giorgio and her deep fear for his safety. She dreaded the funeral. She dreaded what might happen if Giorgio and Alberto crossed paths again. Rose suggested a disguise. Elijah proposed something more radical. They should marry immediately and escape the city. After all, they had a priest in their company. Maria's eyes widened. Hope flickered. She grabbed a sheet of paper and wrote down a message for Giorgio, begging Elijah to deliver it. The good doctor promised he would. Seeing Maria's anxiety, Rose offered to stay the night. Maria gratefully agreed, asking Bice to turn the study into a guest room. She did warn Rose not to enter her father's room. His body still lay there, awaiting the funeral. Elijah thanked Maria and stepped back into the mist, catching the next vaporetto to Giorgio's residence. From there, he made his way to the Biblioteca Marciana, where Giovanni and Leopold were already buried in their research. Giovanni, Leopold, and Elijah sat huddled between stacks of books and scrolls, desperate to extract any useful knowledge about the Devil's Simulare and the Sedefkar Simulacrum. The priest had successfully secured the heretical manuscript, but something gnawed at his conscience. Perhaps it would be wiser to study the Latin tome on the Orient Express with everyone, once they had departed this cursed city. Meanwhile, Elijah and Leopold had uncovered 2 journals written by a French captain named Dubois. According to the entries, one of his subordinates had come into possession of a left leg made of porcelain. The object had become a source of unease throughout Venice. Dubois' own daughter had even been affected by it. He had tried everything to be rid of the cursed artifact, but nothing worked. At last, in desperation, he had buried it beneath the Basilica San Marco in the chapel of Saint Isidoro. As if by divine intervention, the unrest stopped. His daughter's pain vanished. The 3 investigators looked at each other. There was no doubt now they had to break into the basilica. The leg was there, waiting. It was early evening when the 3 companions made their way back to the hotel, passing once more through Piazza San Marco, where the basilica loomed solemnly. But something was wrong. A commotion had erupted at the church's entrance. Curious, the 3 men approached. People were gathered, whispering and clutching rosaries. They had been attending the evening mass when the statues of angels began to weep blood. Real blood. Using his status, Giovanni approached the church staff and was allowed to enter, accompanied by Elijah and Leopold. Inside, crimson streaks glistened on the brows of the statues, but something felt staged. Leopold examined them closely. It looked like the blood had been poured from above. The 3 hurried to a wooden platform above the nave, hoping to find the culprit. But as they reached the top, the wood groaned beneath them, groaned, then cracked. With split-second reflexes, all 3 men leapt aside, tumbling onto the stairs. Wood splintered and fell, maiming a churchgoer below. From the staircase, Giovanni glimpsed something unnatural. A black mass was coiled beneath the collapsed plank. Instinctively, he raised his crucifix and began chanting an exorcism known only to a few. The thing recoiled, slithered, and fled, melting out of the basilica like shadow in water. The blood vanished. The crowd gasped. But something dark bloomed inside Giovanni's soul. Hubris. He felt like a messiah. The fever of false divinity consumed him. The crowd, already shaken and half mad, sensed it. They surged forward, pushing Elijah and Leopold aside, hoisting the priest onto their shoulders. By the time his companions recovered, Giovanni had disappeared into the mist. Cheekily, the other two re-entered the basilica to search for the chapel of Saint Isidoro, but an ecclesiastical officer caught them and escorted them out. Defeated, they returned to the hotel, where Claudia was once again nursing a glass of vodka. When Giovanni came to his senses, every inch of his body ached. His arms hung outstretched, limp, as if... He opened his eyes. He was on a cross. His hands and feet were tied to wooden beams. Below him, a dozen people slept prostrate, bowed as if in worship. Thousands of candles burned around the room, their smoke choking the air. His left hand was loose enough. Carefully, silently, he slipped it free. Then his feet, then his other wrist. He dropped to the moist floor. His satchel was nearby. He crawled toward it, moving slowly between the sleeping forms. His heart pounded. All around him were icons and effigies, twisted, heretical perversions of faith. Heresy. He made for the only exit, a set of stairs at the far end. Someone shouted. He bolted, up the stairs. Above, more people stirred from their sleep. He was in a hall, a place of painted blasphemies and apocryphal quotes scrawled on the walls. Giovanni grabbed a candle, hurled it onto the floor. Flames caught the carpet, then a robe. He fled through the door, almost straight into the sea. Swerving left, he leapt onto the next sidewalk. Behind him, smoke poured from the building. A burning figure flung itself into the dark waters. Giovanni ran, all the way to the hotel, and he thanked God for the strength to do it. The investigators let the frosty night air bite their cheeks. They stood in Piazza San Marco, facing the basilica's dark silhouette. Rose was still at Maria's, but the others had agreed. They would enter the church tonight and retrieve the leg from the chapel of Saint Isidoro. Elijah and Claudia had further plans afterward. They intended to pay Alberto a visit and deliver his reckoning. Giovanni and Leopold weren't sure they'd follow them that far. Giovanni had a stroke of inspiration. He led them around to a small service door at the rear of the basilica and knocked. After a short wait, a priest opened it. Recognizing Giovanni, the savior of the church, he let them in at once. Giovanni explained, with an admirable straight face, that they were here to ensure the basilica's continued safety and needed to conduct a little maintenance. The Venetian priest nodded, trusting, and left them to their work. At night, the church felt hostile. The effigies seemed to glare. Their shadows leaned, their eyes judged. It took time, groping through the darkness, but they eventually found the chapel of Saint Isidoro. Claudia paused, frowning. One of the stones in the floor felt wrong. It radiated with a distant, otherworldly energy. They shared a look. Then they worked, grunting, straining, cursing under their breath, to heave the slab aside. Nothing. Just dust, the imprint of a life-sized leg, and at the center, a yellowed envelope. Elijah opened it and read aloud, his voice echoing through the hallowed dark. God forgive me, God help me, I had great need of it. So I took it with much trembling and sense of sacrilege. That I, a true Venetian, should violate our most sacred place. Yet surely some needs stand above all others. He was weeping and begging for help. His statue was broken, and I had no material to repair it, for this cursed war makes everything scarce. I remembered the old story at last. What else could I do? His grandson died on Monte Grappa, alongside my dear Marco, and his figures are the only things that comfort him. God forgive me. God trust that I only seek to do my best. Beyond the basilica's walls, a storm began to roar. On the other side of the city, Rose stood at her window, unable to sleep. Her thoughts were with her companions, scattered across the lagoon, walking shadowed streets, chasing things that did not belong in the world. Outside, the wind picked up, shutters groaned, boats knocked against piers. The waters of Venice swelled and slammed and whispered in dissonant cacophony. Somewhere in the storm, something waited.